Forbidden love drove her to the edge, and her heart chose him. They say some places are too quiet for their own good. Alba, Texas, is one of them. I rolled into town on a cloudy April morning, the kind that presses low on your shoulders, like the sky's holding its breath. With a population barely scraping 1,000, Alba is more a blink than a dot on the map. A single main road slices through it like a scar. On one side, the Sonic Drive-In, a faded laundromat, and a Dollar General. On the other, First Baptist Church, its white steeple cutting into the sky like a blade of light. That's where the story began and ended for the Keffy family. Before the blood, before the fire, before the betrayal that ripped this God-fearing town wide open, the Keffys were the family you prayed to become. Terry Keffy was a deacon at the church. His wife, Penny, played piano for the choir. Their kids, Erin, Matthew, and Tyler, were homeschooled, polite, well-mannered. Erin had a voice people still talk about like it was something borrowed from heaven. She was quiet, obedient, beautiful voice, just like her mama. Pastor James Reed told me as we stood on the church's front steps. They were the family you'd point to and say, that's how it's supposed to be. But perfection doesn't leave much room for questions. And Erin Keffy, at least the Erin I've spent weeks piecing together, was full of questions. She was born July 27, 1991. Raised in what locals call the bubble, a strict Christian household, little contact with the outside world, no secular music, no TV, and no social media, because Satan, as Terry often preached, was just one click away. The kids were kept home for school, kept close for church, and kept under lock and key when it came to teenage curiosity. A former neighbor, Ruby Ellison, told me, that girl didn't even know what a prom was. She asked my daughter once what kissing felt like. Said her daddy told her it was something you save for marriage or not at all. By the time Erin turned 16, though, the cracks had started to show. Terry, seeing his daughter growing restless, reluctantly let her get a job at the local Sonic. Part-time only, he insisted, and only if the Lord remains first. That's where she met Charlie Wilkinson. He was 18, tall, scruffy, with a cocky grin and a chip on his shoulder the size of East Texas. He didn't go to church. Didn't pretend to. Worked the grill, smoked behind the dumpster, listened to death metal in his beat-up truck. The kind of boy any overprotective parent would fear. Erin was hooked in a week. He'd flirt with her, then turn around and threaten to beat the shit out of anyone else who looked at her, said Caitlin Moore, who worked shifts with Erin at Sonic. I met Caitlin in a diner a few towns over. She didn't want to be seen back in Alba. I think it was the first time Erin felt like she had power. Like someone wanted her so badly, he'd fight for her. She didn't get that at home. By Christmas, Charles had proposed. He gave her a ring, his grandmother's, he said. Erin wore it like a badge. At school, at work, even to youth group. Her parents were livid. Terry demanded she end the relationship. Took her phone, canceled her shifts, started driving her to and from church again. And that's when things got dark. She started saying crazy stuff, Caitlin told me. My parents are ruining my life. I want out. I wish they were dead. I thought she was just venting. Teenagers say dumb shit. But she said it with this emptiness. Like it wasn't anger. Like it was already decided. The weeks that followed were a tug-of-war between obedience and rebellion. Terry tightened his grip. Erin pulled harder. She snuck out at night. Lied about choir practice. Met Charles in secret. And somewhere along the way, the lines between teenage angst and something much darker began to blur. I was standing by the house, the Keffy home. 3 people died in that house. Penny, Matthew, and Tyler. Terry survived by crawling out a bathroom window, riddled with bullets, soaked in blood. Erin, she wasn't inside. She was in a car down the road, waiting, and maybe listening. The people of Alba don't talk about that night anymore. The town wants to forget. But the silence here, it isn't peace. It's fear wrapped in prayer. It's grief no hymn can drown out. As I left the empty lot where the Keffys once lived, I realized I wasn't chasing a story about a murder. I was chasing something much more disturbing. The unraveling of a girl who was supposed to be the light of her family, and instead became the match that burned it to the ground. Next, I would dig into the love story that started it all, and find out just how far it had to go before turning fatal. Love has rules in a place like Alba. It's supposed to be quiet, modest, supervised. But the love between Erin Keffy and Charles Wilkinson wasn't love in the town's eyes. It was war. I began piecing together the months leading up to the murders through interviews, police records, and Erin's old journal entries, which were later introduced as evidence in court. They painted a portrait of a girl at war with two worlds, one that told her to submit, and one that told her to run. She'd met Charles at Sonic, yes, but their connection wasn't just hormonal. It was electric, defiant, explosive. He was the first person to ever tell Erin that she didn't have to be who her parents wanted her to be. He called her beautiful. He told her God was a lie. He said her voice wasn't meant for hymns, it was meant for screaming. And Erin? She was all in. Caitlin Moore had told me about the changes she saw in Erin, how the girl who once cried when she accidentally said, hell, at work started mouthing off to customers and coming in late, reeking of weed and cheap cologne. But what struck me wasn't just the rebellion. It was the precision of it. She wanted her parents to know, Caitlin said. She wanted them to be angry. She wanted them to suffer. But not because she hated them. I think it's because she thought they deserved it for locking her away for so long. One night, Erin snuck Charles into her bedroom. It was a Wednesday. Her father had fallen asleep early after Bible study. Her mother was still downstairs, cleaning the kitchen. Her brothers were already in bed. Charles parked his truck half a mile away. Erin guided him through the woods with a flashlight she'd stolen from the church supply closet. They kissed. They whispered. And then Charles told her he loved her. Forever. In any other life, that might have been a sweet story. But Charles Wilkinson wasn't the fairy tale boy. He was volatile. He bragged about guns. He carried a hunting knife on his belt. And according to text messages retrieved by police, he had a violent obsession with Erin's parents long before that fateful night. You deserve freedom. They don't own you. I'd do anything for you. Anything. Just say the word. Erin never told him to stop. In fact, the messages show she pushed him further. You don't know what it's like here, she wrote. They're killing me slowly. I can't breathe. I tracked down a former classmate of Charles, someone who agreed to speak with me under condition of anonymity. We met in a parking lot outside a gas station off Highway 69. Charles was twisted, man, he said. He wasn't just acting out. He had this God complex. He talked about starting a new life with Erin, but in, like, apocalyptic terms. Burn it all down, he used to say. I thought he meant metaphorically. I guess not. But Charles wasn't alone. His best friend, Charles Wade, and another teen named Bobby Johnson were part of their tight circle. They drank together, smoked, talked about running away. Erin was the only girl in the group, and that made her the queen of their chaos. They had a code word for their fantasy, reset. It meant total escape, starting over somewhere no one knew them. Charles Wilkinson even made a playlist for it, songs like Burning Bright by Shinedown and Bodies by Drowning Pool. I got access to Erin's journal through a sympathetic court clerk. In it, she wrote, maybe if they're gone, I can finally be me. Maybe God will forgive me if it means I'm finally free. It was chilling, not because of what it said, but because of what it didn't. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing, no mercy. On February 28, 2008, 2 days before the murders, Erin skipped youth group. She told her parents she was going to the library. Instead, she met Charles and Wade behind a deserted car wash just outside Alba. Witnesses said they were laughing, drinking, talking about the plan. Charles brought a .22 caliber pistol. Wade brought a sword. Erin brought a map of her own house. That night, she snuck back in and went to sleep like nothing had happened. I found a former youth pastor, Rick Fields, who had counseled Erin during those final weeks. He remembered something that haunts him to this day. She came into my office one evening, he said, tears welling in his eyes. And she asked, do you think God would forgive someone for something they haven't done yet? I said, of course. She smiled. I thought it was relief. Now I realize it was something else. They set the plan in motion on the night of February 29th. Erin told her parents she was going to bed early. She made sure the doors were unlocked. She packed a bag and slipped it into the trunk of Charles's car earlier that day, along with her favorite Bible, ironically, the one her mother had gifted her when she turned 13. And then, she waited. They parked down the road. Erin stayed in the car. She didn't go in the house. She didn't pull the trigger. But she unlocked the gate. She lit the fuse. When I read the police report later, one quote stood out above all others, something Charles told investigators during his confession. She said she wanted it. She begged me to do it. I thought we'd be together after. The idea of together forever had become a pact soaked in gasoline. What happened next would shatter the illusion of young love forever and leave 3 innocent people dead in its wake. Some nights never end. Not in memory, not in scars, not in silence. March 1st, 2008 was one of those nights. By then, Erin Keffy had made her choice. She wasn't a frightened daughter caught between duty and desire. She was determined, cold, focused. Everything that followed wasn't a tragedy of impulse. It was an execution in motion. It started just after 2 a.m. The town of Alba lay asleep. The woods that bordered the Keffy property were still and dark, but not empty. 2 young men moved through the trees, armed and ready. Charles Wilkinson carried a .22 caliber Ruger pistol. Charles Wade brought a samurai-style sword, stolen from a friend's house a few weeks earlier. They knew the layout. Erin had walked them through it again and again, where each bedroom was, what time the family went to sleep, how to get in without alerting the dogs. The front door was unlocked, just as promised. Inside, the Keffy household was at rest. Penny and Terry were asleep in the master bedroom. 8-year-old Tyler and 13-year-old Matthew were in their shared room. The TV in the living room was still glowing faintly from a paused DVD. Penny often fell asleep that way. Nothing about the house suggested it was about to become a crime scene. What happened next lasted less than 20 minutes. The first shot hit Terry in the shoulder. He awoke confused, the sound still echoing in his skull. Before he could sit up, a second shot tore into his face. He dropped to the floor. It was chaos from there. Flashes, thuds, screams muffled by walls. Penny was shot multiple times and then stabbed. Tyler, just 8 years old, was chased down and murdered in his bed. Matthew, the oldest of the 2 brothers, fought back. Defensive wounds were found later on his arms and hands, but it wasn't enough. The sword did the rest. And outside, Erin was waiting in the getaway car. Calm, collected. According to court records, she sat listening to music with the volume low. Not once did she leave her seat. Not once did she call 911. Not once did she ask them to stop. When the 2 Charleses returned, blood-stained and shaking, she greeted them without emotion. They drove off into the dark, stopping briefly at a local convenience store before hiding out at Charles Wade's trailer, just a few miles away. But back at the house, something unexpected happened. Terry Keffy didn't die. Somehow, despite 2 gunshot wounds and blood loss that would have killed most men, he crawled out of the bedroom, down a hallway soaked in horror, and out the back of the house. He staggered through the woods, barefoot, barely conscious, his only focus, survive. Roughly 300 yards away, he reached a neighbor's house and pounded on the door before collapsing. When emergency responders arrived, they didn't believe he was still alive. He was rushed into surgery with a bullet lodged in his skull. Doctors said it was a miracle. But miracles in Alba, Texas, had a strange way of costing everything. The investigation began that morning, when officers stepped into what Sheriff David McDaniels later described as the worst crime scene of my career. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of a robbery. The scene was personal, targeted, intentional. Terry's statement, when he regained consciousness days later, changed everything. He told investigators he hadn't seen Erin in the house that night. He remembered waking up to the shots, but realized, in the chaos, that his daughter's room was empty. He called her name before everything went black. That was the first crack in Erin's story. Because when police found her hours later, walking along a country road with mud on her jeans and no clear explanation, she said she had been kidnapped, taken by force, held at gunpoint, and dumped miles from her home. It didn't add up. She wasn't injured. She wasn't disoriented. She didn't ask about her family. And the more questions they asked, the more her story unraveled. Back at the station, when confronted with inconsistencies, Erin finally broke. She didn't confess, not fully, but she admitted she had known the killers. She admitted she'd been seeing Charles Wilkinson behind her parents' backs, that they'd talked about running away, that she didn't think they'd actually do it. But the evidence said otherwise. Phone records showed dozens of messages exchanged in the days before the murder, discussions about timing, access points, weapons. Erin had helped plan every detail, even suggesting ways to avoid leaving fingerprints. She told them when her brothers usually fell asleep, when her father was least likely to be alert, and how to shut off the alarm system. It wasn't panic. It was precision. By the time arrest warrants were issued for Charles Wilkinson, Charles Wade, and Erin herself, the town of Alba had already begun to crack under the weight of the truth. This wasn't a story of young love gone wrong. This was premeditated family annihilation, orchestrated by a girl who once sang gospel at the altar, now trading hymns for silence and blood. I visited the site of the murders again before leaving town. No signs remained of what had happened there. Just trees and grass and the faint sound of wind through the pines. But you could feel it, the presence of something broken that would never fully heal. And I couldn't shake one question. What makes a daughter plan the slaughter of her own family? Love? Control? Freedom? Or was it something worse, something colder? Trials don't begin in courtrooms. They begin in whispers, on porches, in churches, in the corners of small-town diners. By the time Erin Keffy stood before a judge, Alba had already decided what she was. Not a victim, not a manipulated teenager, a monster in a Sunday dress. The state of Texas charged Erin with 3 counts of capital murder. The prosecution didn't buy the narrative of a naive girl led astray. They argued she was the engine behind the plan, silent, deliberate, and just as guilty as the 2 young men who entered the house. Charles Wilkinson and Charles Wade were both arrested within 48 hours of the murders. Their confessions were raw and immediate. Both implicated Erin. Both described her as the one who wanted it to happen. In a move that stunned many, both accepted plea deals to avoid the death penalty. They received life sentences without the possibility of parole. Erin's case was different. She hadn't pulled the trigger. She hadn't wielded the sword. She hadn't physically harmed anyone. But her fingerprints were all over the planning, on the messages, the map of the house, the timeline she outlined for her so-called rescuers. The law calls that conspiracy to commit capital murder. And in Texas, that's enough. What complicated matters was the testimony of the one man who survived it all, Terry Keffy. When he entered the courtroom for the first hearing, the room went still. People stood. Some bowed their heads. Others looked away. He'd lost everything. His wife, his sons, his home. But not his faith. He took the stand and spoke not with fire, but with grief. He confirmed that Erin had not been in the house during the killings. He described the horror of waking up to gunfire. The screams. The cold floor. The pain. He recalled calling for Erin and hearing nothing in return. That silence, he said, was worse than the bullets. But what shocked the courtroom came after the testimony. When asked what punishment he believed his daughter deserved, Terry Keffy didn't ask for her death. He asked for her life. I forgive her, he said. It doesn't mean I understand. It doesn't mean I accept what happened. But I forgive. Because I have to. Because that's what Penny would have done. And because I still believe God can reach her, even in prison. Some saw it as mercy. Others as madness. Forgiveness like that isn't natural. It's chosen. But his words had weight. Enough that prosecutors revised their approach. Enough that the death penalty was quietly removed from the table. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. The sentence, life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 40 years. No one in the courtroom wept. Not even Erin. She stood motionless as the verdict was read, eyes fixed forward, hands folded in front of her like she was back in church. If she felt remorse, she didn't show it. If she grieved her mother, her brothers, her past life, it was buried under layers no courtroom could reach. After the trial, I spoke briefly with one of the jurors. She didn't want her name published. We weren't sure if she wanted them dead, she told me. But we were sure she didn't want them alive. Those words followed me for weeks. In the years since, Terry has become something of a local legend. He moved away from Alba, remarried, started over. But he still visits the prison occasionally. Still writes to Erin. Still calls her his daughter. I found that both beautiful and unbearable. The people of Alba moved on in different ways. Some pretend it never happened. Others teach their children the story like a fable. How even the best homes can become haunted if love turns into control. There are no Keffys left on Keffy Lane. The church still sings hymns, but Penny's piano is silent now. And Erin? She's inmate number 014203114. Serving time in Gatesville. Still eligible for parole in the year 2048. I was shown a photograph from her first year in prison. She's smiling. Not broadly. Not warmly. Just enough to unsettle you. As a reporter, I don't pretend to know what that smile means. But as a human being, I can tell you this. It's the smile of someone who lives with a truth too heavy to say out loud.